Okay, I think we can start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 14th installment of the HBP Tea Slides. My name is Alper, and I am the host for this session. Today, we will have two very interesting talks of 10 minutes, roughly, presented by Michiel van der Vlag and Paschal Ochang. After the talks, we have time for questions. And in the end, of course, both presenters are available and open for discussion and questions from your side. And as you have seen already, you can ask with the question and answer button in the panel below, or raise your hand and use your microphone to directly ask for your questions. This session will also be recorded and later available on the e-library or the YouTube channel of the education team. So also be sure to subscribe. If there are any technical problems, please write a mail to education@humanbrainproject.eu. Okay, let me first introduce Michiel. Michiel did his master's in computer engineering, architecture, and embedded systems at the Erasmus Medical Center in neuroscience at the Technical University of Delft. Additionally, he has a master's in philosophy from the University of Groningen. Now he's a master of the Simulation Data Lab, Jülich Supercomputing Center at the Research Center in Jülich. He's researching generic rate-based model features to develop RateML, and he also develops domain-specific languages for rate-based models. Michiel implements and co-develops workflows for the virtual big brain interface, connecting brain atlases to simulator. In his presentation, he will introduce us to RateML, a code generation tool for brain network models. Michiel, please go ahead.
My name is Michiel van der Vlag. I'm part of the SimLab Neurosciences, as Alper mentioned, responsible for developing applications related to the virtual brain. I will be talking about a specific application that has been developed during SDA2, SDA3, called RateML, which is a model generator for the virtual brain. I will firstly explain a little bit about explain TVB a little bit. And how RateML relates to the elements that make up a simulation of the virtual brain. And we'll talk a little bit about the epileptic use case, one of the successes of the virtual brain, and how you can build, for instance, or rebuild the epileptic model using RateML. And I will demonstrate a little bit how you can simulate the results of this tool, and talk about what is next for RateML. Under the assumption that brain function emerges from the interaction of large number of neurons under spatial and temporal constraints of brain structure, and the fact that other simulators more or less focus on the micro and the mesoscopic levels, the virtual brain was born. The virtual brain basically is a whole brain simulator using abstract representations of parts of the brain called neural mass models, represented by a derivative, representing, for instance, the firing rate of the collective firing rate of that part of the brain. These models are then connected through a detailed connectome, which has, next to spatial, also temporal aspects. The simulation core is written in Python, but there are some efficient GIT backends in development, which RateML targets as well. I will talk about this a little bit later on. There's a scripting and a graphical user interface, and the platform also includes storage and sharing next to simulation. So it's not only a simulator. You can do much more with it than only simulations. So how does a typical workflow of TVB look like? Well, on the right you see an image that represents such a workflow. First, you obtain a partialization template. This can be from a human brain atlas, for instance, which is then loaded into the simulator, connecting these dynamical models of certain brain areas together, using this detailed connectome. And then for a simulator, these modules that I've listed on the left side, these are the minimal models that you need to set up for a simulation. And also with RateML, you can address those modules. So there are models which represent the dynamical model of the local brain area. There are some predefined models already available, like the Kuramoto, the Wang, or the Epileptor, and they're all used for different kinds of research. Then you have to select an integrator, either stochastically or deterministic. Well, there are some integrators available: the Euler, the Hein, or the Runge-Kutta-4. You have to define monitors. Monitor is a variable that you find interesting, that you want to have, that you want to observe of the simulation. And then you have to define the coupling. This basically tells you something about the interaction of these local brain areas, and you can select linear coupling or difference coupling, for instance. When you press play, then for instance, you can produce a bold model, which you then want to fit. Basically, how it is: you have this patient that you want to simulate. A certain signal is produced, like a bold signal, and then you want to fit it against the input signals to mimic the exact behavior of the patient. With RateML, you can address those modules, and RateML is based on a domain-specific language called LAMS. This has been developed by the NeuroML teams. NeuroML2, for instance, uses this meta language to build NeuroML2. And basically, there are it consists of some elements that represent certain features of these models, with which you can then easily build models for TVB. It basically works like this. It uses a Mako templating library, in which a human-readable extensible markup language file, an XML file, is being read and translated into models for the virtual brain. And you can either produce models for the Numba backend and also for the CUDA. And the CUDA models are already parameter space exploration ready. So this is the extra feature that is added by RateML. Within the regular graphical user interface, you cannot do parameter sweeps, or at least not as efficient as is done on the GPU. As I said, one of the success stories of the virtual brain is that it can already be used to model large-scale epileptic seizure dynamics. So if you have the relevant neural mass model, you can ask multiple questions on this epileptic patient, such as where does the epileptic zone, where is the epileptic zone? Where does the oscillation start for this epileptic patient? And in 20% of the cases, surgical resection is also necessary because some patients are drug resistant. 20% of them are drug resistant, and they need surgical alterations for them to cure epilepsy. And you can use TVB for this as well. The graphical user interface has this overview of this connection matrix, where you can, for instance, switch off the amygdala or the hippocampus and leave the parohippocampal cortex on, and see how the brain reacts if those regions don't work together in the simulation. And then yeah, the doctors, the surgeons can decide which brain part can be cut out in order to cure this patient. So now let's switch over to an example of a simulation. What I did, I ported already the epileptor file in the XML file, which is an example of here. I won't go into details, but there are multiple elements which you can read in the documentation on how to actually set up the time derivatives of the behavior of this model. You can set the sweep area of the parameters that you want to sweep. So here you see, for instance, the time derivatives. This is the epileptor. It's a complex model. It has 6 states, which all have different behavior, which interact together. And then within the simulation of TVB, of course, this is then represented by one node, and all these nodes interact together as well. Yeah, then certain coupling functions can be defined here, as I expressed. A pre and a post-synaptic coupling activity can be defined using these component types. And also, if you want stochastic integration enabled, you should just put the word make a component type named noise, and then stochastic integration will be enabled. Now, the beauty of it is that it abstracts the implementation on software and on hardware. So when you run RateML, you just have to run. I hope that this is clearly visible. It's just you just execute a wrapper around this LAMPS library, giving 2 arguments: the XML file name, in this case the epileptor, and the backend called CUDA in this case. If you then run it, there are no errors. 2 files will be produced: the epileptor.c file, which is the model, which is the simulator object, together with the driver. So basically, what you do is you produce a parameter sweep enabled CUDA TVB simulator, and in which every thread represents a certain parameter combination. So every thread that you run is a TVB simulation producing a certain output using the parameters that the range that you have inputted. So if you want to run it, you just execute this, the Python model driver epileptor, it's called. And you have to give a few arguments, like a simulation time length is 400 steps at this case, at a DT of 0.01. And yeah, it's a very small network, only 4 nodes, just for demonstration purposes. I spawn a network of 4 different parameters that are swept, and I plot the output. And if I run it now, then you will see how it works, that yeah, certain oscillation occurs for this type of model. We monitor now the first state variable, and yeah, you see that certain oscillations occur, and yeah, all 4 of them are, all 4 parameters are plotted, and you see that they vary a little bit. So this is the effect that the ranges of these parameters have on this simulation. Yeah, and with this you can then explore, of course, any range that you would like to explore, any variable that you need to have explored over a range of multiple values. You can use this model for. Let's switch back to the presentation. So yeah, is it fast enough? I think I would say yes. We can do up to almost 74,000 parameters on a single GPU, and we're not even talking about the multiple GPU implementation, but 74,000 parameters can be swept. Combinations can be swept. And yeah, we see that that runtime is scales linear with the number of iterations being performed. Of course, more iterations take more time. That's the conclusion. But it definitely is fast enough, and it also is very easy to explore so many parameters at once. So what's next? RateML, yeah, is connected. This produces a lot of data, of course. 74,000 parameters. You don't want to check them all by hand. So we adopted the learning to learn framework as well, for which we have built optimizees that learning to learn is a hyperparameterization framework in which you can do, yeah, you can search for a certain regime within your results. Yeah, I won't go into detail of this, but this is one of the works that that we're doing right now. It's also connected to the work package 1 showcase, in which data is read from a human brain atlas and then transformed into a TVB model, in which on which parameters are swept as well. Yeah, we're working on a graphical user interface, because now there's only a scripting interface. The graphical user interface is also in progress. That would make the story complete, of course, because then you can build your own models or modify existing models very easily and do simulations within TVB and yeah, doing research like this. Yeah, so that's, I think I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, some acknowledgements. I didn't do this work alone, but together with Sandra Diaz, well, all the names here are mentioned, should be named. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michiel. For the moment, I don't see questions, so I guess we still have to wait a little bit until the talk is digested, and then we can go after the second talk actually to the questions, I would suggest. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Paschal Ochang. Paschal is currently a doctoral researcher at the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility, in short, CCSR, situated in the Montfort University, Leicester, United Kingdom. He has degrees in computer engineering and telecommunication engineering. He is also a postgraduate representative of the CCSR and a HBP student ambassador. His PhD research is in information systems, with a particular focus on brain data governance. Now he will talk about towards the understanding of global brain data governance. Paschal, the stage is yours.
Okay. Yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen. So we will deviate a little bit from the technical stuff. So yeah, so my research is towards the understanding of global brain data governance, as you can see the title. So the research, the outline for this research, for this presentation will be the background of the research itself, the knowledge gap that exists based on the background of the research and the methodology, and what we've currently found as the research progresses, and the contribution to knowledge, and also future work that will be ongoing for this research. Okay, so so introducing the background of the research, neuroscience research, as we all know, as we have a lot of neuroscience researchers here, is producing big brain data and data sets which exist in different geographical locations and jurisdictions. As you can see, with a little bit of a pictorial representation there. So this exists in Africa, in America, in Asia, governed by different laws and regulations and cultural practices as well. So this has brought the need for collaboration. There is need for collaboration to advance neuroscience, as we all know. And this has led to different database repositories, platforms, eBrains, OpenNeuro, and Brain Atlas, which distributed geographically in different regions. And it has also brought about the International Brain Initiative, which is an initiative that intends to form an umbrella network and collate these different projects together under one umbrella so that collaboration can be advanced. So this is currently the International Brain Initiative landscape. You can see there that they have the Canadian Brain Research Strategy, the US Brain Initiative, the European Union Human Brain Project, which is where we are situated in, China Brain Project, Japan Brain Minds, Australia Brain Initiative, Korea Brain Initiative. These different initiatives and brain projects have sub-projects under them that form this. Now you can see there that Africa and Latin America have not joined, but they have made attempts to join the Brain Research Africa Initiative, to join the IBI and the Lat Brain Initiative. So you can see that there's a global unification under the IBI to advance neuroscience. However, there are still challenges and concerns, even though the IBI has been formed. Some of these challenges are ethical challenges because these regions have different ethical standards. What is considered as privacy for one region, for example, Europe is not considered as same thing as privacy, for example, in Asia. There are also legal challenges in terms of reciprocity in laws. For example, in Europe, you have GDPR, which sometimes is not reciprocal with some other regions. And there are also social and cultural challenges, which stems down even to religion, which might influence, and politics, which might influence collaborations and sharing, especially sharing of data. So the knowledge gap here is that despite an agreement that research should be ethical, there is still a debate about what ethical requirements and best practices should be attained to achieve its realization and to achieve collaboration. So the differences in these jurisdictions globally may prevent collaboration in terms of how ethical principles are reflected in their policies. For some policies, you might see religious concepts, and for some areas, for some regions, there are no clear, for example, animal rights law, so they can use animals in research without complying to the principles, the ethical principles. Then policies and guidelines may also be influenced by their cultural narratives, religion, and customs and political values of that region, which there exist. So using this knowledge gap and trying to bridge this gap, we proceeded to develop these objectives and the research questions. And the major research question there is to understand the ethical, what legal and ethical principles influence brain data governance as a whole. How is data research governed in these different places, and how can we push it to receive unified governance? So in order to answer the research question, we broke this down into 3 sub-research questions. So the first one is, what is the current landscape of brain data governance? What legal and ethical principles influence brain data governance policies and guidelines issued by different projects or different regions as well? And how do the ethical and legal principles influence the different key stakeholders that are involved in brain data research? So for the first question here, which that's the stage we are in, we did a scoping review of academic literature that talks about data governance in information systems and biomedical databases by searching for literature and using an inclusion and exclusion criteria to get this literature, and analyzed this literature using a thematic analysis approach to actually identify different principles that exist or that are practiced in academic literature. Then for the second question, we intend to do a state-of-the-art or horizon scan of brain research projects to identify the policies and guidelines that they have issued. We intend to look at international guidelines, for example, the Declaration of Human Rights. We tend to look at regional, continental scale guidelines and policies, and also national guidelines and policies, especially of members that are part of the IBI, for example, Japan, Australia. What regulations do they use that influences their policies? So we intend to do also a data analysis using a thematic analysis as well to identify these different laws. For example, in Europe is the GDPR. What about China? What about Africa? What about Australia, for example? Then for the third question, what we do is we intend to carry out semi-structured interviews with different stakeholders. This can be data protection officers in different project, data curators, researchers as well, those that are involved in the collection of this data, to discuss with them what they understand by these different principles that have been identified previously. How do they feel these principles should be governed? What are their own perceptions about this principle? So we intend to use an approach called discourse analysis, which is an approach where you can identify, we aim to identify constructs through discourse and underlying cultural principles that's been used by previous research before. So currently, we have answered the first question. The publication, the document is still undergoing a review for publication. So some of the interesting findings we saw there was that, yeah, we found a range of principles in academic literature that are being discussed and currently on board. Then there's currently a large variation of how the principles and discussions are presented, and they are very multidimensional. For example, you can see in terms of fairness, you can see fairness defined in terms of access to data for researchers, and also fairness in terms of access to data for participants as well. Then you can also see another angle of fairness called procedural fairness. There should be fairness to different researchers and projects that want to submit their data. For example, we all know that if you are for example, in Asia now, you want to submit your data to the eBrains platform now, you need to undergo ethical checks, and there need to be regulatory compliance. Now, I think I've seen some little scenarios where this has not been possible because of the fact that there is no legal reciprocity. It's not reciprocal. You need to, if you're in Asia, you need to now undergo GDPR compliance. Now you can see that it's very challenging for scientists or neuroscientists out there who wants to store his or her data in Europe. So we also notice that some of the principles are still at their infancy and are rarely mentioned extensively. For example, the concept of or the principle of neural rights. And we all know, some of us might know that Chile has actually enacted a neural rights law. So perhaps the discussion around neural rights needs to be advanced more to see how maybe other jurisdictions might look at neural rights. And even if they do that, will the power of neural rights, will it be only owned by the government, or will civil societies and researchers be involved in developing some of the guidelines? Then so retention and destruction was one of those. We also found that there is little discussion about destruction of data, deletion of data after acquiring the data. So there is also a heavy argument about consent models, especially around opt-in and opt-out models. There was a heavy argument about consent, and some of the arguments was that if better opt-out models are defined, then it will actually enhance informed consent. So there are also very few definitions of data governance in the context of brain data. Most of the analysis saw that most of the definitions are under information systems, and so there needs to be more definitions on the neuroscience and brain data governance as well. There are also a lot of arguments in the clarity of ownership. Who owns the data? Some researchers concluded that it's the principal investigator. that owns the data. Some talk about the participants own the data. So there is a conflict of ownership there, and clarity of ownership is essential. Then pseudonymization and anonymization was another one where different scientists, different researchers use these concepts, the way they use them, the conflicts. Some don't know if it's pseudonymized data, it's an anonymized data. In different publications, they conclude that pseudonymized data is anonymized data. And yeah, so the next steps now for the research is to identify the ethical and legal principles that influence policies and guidelines for brain research projects and brain research organizations. So that will lead to the discussions with stakeholders, key stakeholders in these different brain projects to understand their perceptions about data governance and these ethical principles. And yeah, so this research will actually contribute to the discussion about creating a governance structure that will allow collaboration and data sharing between different regions. And most especially, it will look at developing a framework that is ethical and especially culturally informed so that you can understand different cultures and different perspectives of researchers globally. So yeah, so thank you for listening. That will be all from me. Sorry, I took extra time.
Thank you, Pascal.
Yep.
Now I would open the question session. So far, I don't see many questions in the chat or in the question and answer. So maybe I can just start with a few questions from my side to you guys. So the first one goes to Michiel in that case. So you talked about TVB and RateML, but if I'm new to TVB and RateML, where should I look into? Where do I start to learn more about the tools you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that needs to be addressed as well, of course. Yeah, usually RateML is part of the main TVB root repository. So if you go to that, you will find a folder in the scientific library called RateML, which has a README file as well that describes how to build your models. There's a blank template there as well that holds all the elements of which you can use to build TVB models with descriptions. So if you take this template and you fill in all the data that you want, you can use this template as a guideline. And also we have notebooks online on the collaboratory of eBrains. Yeah, if you there just search for RateML, you will find some public notebooks that will guide you through model generation, the whole process, and either execute it locally or execute it on on HPC on a supercomputer using PyUnicore. Yeah, and if you're interested in these kind of things, I could always, of course, aid you with using this kind of framework. Just send me an email, and then I will help you set up these models for you, the simulation workflow.
I have a second question for you, Michiel. First would be, does this normal TVB simulation run on GPU, and how easy is it actually to use multiple GPUs? That it's something you mentioned also in your talk shortly. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I would say that it's fairly easy. If you run it on a single, you can run it on a single GPU for this scale because it's embarrassingly parallel. There's no the simulations. I mean, it's a parameter space exploration, right? So it is there's no dependence between the simulations. So you would just have to spawn a network of multiple GPUs, yeah, and just distribute the number of parameters that need to be swept accordingly. This is not into place yet, but it can be done fairly easily. This can be set up fairly easily. I haven't done this yet because there's no demand yet for these kinds of large parameter sweeps. But we have other backends. We have MPI backends as well that run it on CPUs, for instance, multi-threading multiple CPUs. Yeah, but it's easily to adapt this and input. Let it run on multiple GPUs.
Okay, thanks. I've seen a question in the chat, which was very similar. Actually, I wanted to ask you as well, Pascal. So Ivan is asking, could you clarify who the stakeholders were in the project? Were there primarily researchers, government figures, anyone in private research institutes? So who are these stakeholders you mentioned before?
Okay. Yeah, that would be for the third research question. For the stakeholders, what we intend to look at, not only primarily researchers. We intend to look at those that are involved in, for example, data protection officers. Because based on the GDPR, I think most of the research organizations now in the UK and I think Europe have data protection officers. We intend to also look at those involved in data management as well in some of these brain projects. For now, we do not intend to involve government figures in the research, but I think that's something we might look at. We're trying to limit the scope of the stakeholders, basically researchers, data curation officers, data protection officers, scientists involved in the brain projects. Yeah, so because of the time limitation of the project as well. So yeah, but that is something we might look at in terms of government figures. For private research, yeah, where we intend to involve private research is in the second question, where we intend to look at policies and guidelines. We are actually thinking of redefining that to involve guidelines dished out by private organizations as well. So it's something that, yeah, we will refine. We intend to do that because we're looking at, okay, maybe if we focus only on research, publicly funded brain research organizations, we should look at also privately funded as well. We might use funding for that. So it's something we're thinking of doing, using funding to group private and public funding.
Okay, then I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is there any timeline planned? I mean, this is quite complex, the whole procedure, but maybe is there already a timeline planned for a global scale? Or is it just like that you are first in the finding out everything part, and then at some point you will come back to a global scale? And do you think, how realistic is that? Will that be achieved in general? What's your take for that?
Yes, it's really huge work. The timeline is 2020 by 2024. That's the timeline, and it's an ongoing process where we intend to redefine the scope as well. Like in terms of interviews, we can capture, like we can to a large extent, we can capture everybody in interviews, but we're thinking of in each region, if we can get 10 participants, 10 or 15 in a focus group, then we believe it should be enough to cover to a large scale what we'll be looking for. When we analyze the interviews, we should be able to to do that. Then in terms of analyzing policies and guidelines, yeah, we think to a large scale, we cannot involve every blessed project. That is why we are using the IBI as the umbrella project, and also international declarations that have been issued that are seen as guidelines and policies. It's an ambitious project. Yeah, that's what research is about. We don't think we should be able to say, hey, at the end of the day, okay, this is a framework, this is what you should use. But at least it's going to spearhead that. It's going to create a foundation to push that forward.
Yeah, thank you. It's quite ambitious, as you said.
Yeah.
Hopefully everything goes well. I mean, it's evolving all the time as well, right? Yeah, I think we are close to the end of the session, actually.
I have a question, maybe, if I might.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Is there anything you could say about how all these aspects that you're researching, like the cultural, social influences, have affected the progress on brain development? I mean, you said that it was already, that you're still researching the influence, right? But is there already something that you can say about this?
Okay, if I get your question correctly, you're asking if this underlying maybe cultural aspects affect the research, isn't it?
Yeah, the progress. So
yeah,
if it wasn't there, would we already have like a complete functional virtual brain?
Yes, I think so, because one aspect of that is in sharing of data. If those hurdles and challenges were not there, then it will be easy to share data for research. Like there was a time I was speaking with one of the members of tax 4, that's tax 4, data governance and curation, where someone wanted to submit his data, but when they were doing ethical checks, this was animal data, regulatory checks, ethical checks, and all that. They saw that the person's data and the form filled by the principal investigator did not conform to regulatory standards used by Europe here. So the argument was that yes, but the regulatory standards he used conform to his country. So these are some of the challenges as well, and also doing this will also bring out which laws influences this. Since the policies sit at the bottom of these countries, then what regulations are they enacted from? Like I think in the US is I think HIPAA is used, but for now, what about Africa? What about a researcher in Africa that wants to submit his data to eBrains? What does he do? Is there a regulatory standard he can follow? How does he comply with the eBrains governance structure regulatory standard? So those are some of the things. So I feel, or we feel, that if there is an understanding of these different cultures and backgrounds and regulatory structure, there can be something like a central framework that someone can say, okay, I comply with this, I comply with this, I comply with this. Therefore, I think I can submit my data to eBrains, even though I'm in Africa and there's no brain repository that exists there.
So basically, to say it crude, science would be better off if there weren't any policies.
Well, it's it's a two-way thing. It will be better, and it will also not be good, because yeah, the policies are there to enhance regulation, but because they differ, yeah, those hurdles have to be crossed, and in some cases, principal investigators and researchers are actually disappointed when they can't cross those hurdles. However, in one of our papers, we just released pseudonymization of brain images while retaining scientific utility. Yeah, we looked at some platforms, and we saw that some platforms do not use encryption for the data. Some platforms do not use do not fully pseudonymize their data to enable sharing, and authentication as well. They use weak authentication. For example, they can use your Gmail and just sign in and download the data set. So yeah, this was something we looked at because yeah, if some of them actually use justified process where the principal investigator has to submit a form and it is reviewed and the justification of the research is actually approved before access to the data is allowed, while some you just download the data straight on. And yeah, so these are some of the things we intend to look at, that there should be a standard.
Yeah, great. Very interesting, I think. Thanks. Is there any way we can track this, the progress somewhere online? Your progress?
Yeah, for now, there's one paper we have released about retaining pseudonymization and retaining scientific while retaining scientific utility. The one about the pilot study is still undergoing review. Yeah, so however, yeah, I can share that with you as it goes on. I can share that one with you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I will come back to you guys later when it comes to time for interviews.
Yeah, please do so.
Yeah.
Thank you both for the very interesting talks. I don't see any other questions anymore, and I think we've reached our time. But as you can see, there are lots of material for discussion. So on that matter, student conference is coming up next year. So I hope many of you join and we can continue discussions. But also, if you want to reach out to the speakers, you can either write them email, you can write the education team to forward the emails, of course, or you visit the Slack channel. And there you can reach also to other scientists and the student ambassadors and representatives as well. And with that, we're at the end of our Tea Slides. I believe there are 2 more slides coming up from the education team. Which basically you can present your work. And also the next date would be the 2nd of December, again at 2 o'clock, or for the next HBP Tea Slide session. With that, thank you for listening, and hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, have a nice day.
Bye.